Can't knock what I was saying about him before. Now I just don't like the guy personally.
John Cena finally acknowledged what everyone had been speculating about. He's revealing why other wrestlers share his distaste for Hulk Hogan. It turns out that fans were unaware of Hogan's full range of abilities. What specifically did Cena disclose, and why is he now making his voice heard? Let's dissect it. When discussing the top superstars in WWE, there are instances of betrayal and a breach of trust. It's inevitable that John Cena will come up. The 16-time world champion who led the organization through the brutal aggression era and into the PG age has long been renowned for his frank assessments of the professional wrestling industry. Even while Cena has mostly kept cordial ties with wrestling greats, the tale of why so many WWE performers have a strong animosity toward Hulk Hogan exposes a decades-long pattern of treachery, self-centeredness, and destructive conduct. We must first recognize Hogan's indisputable contributions to the wrestling industry in order to comprehend the extent of the hostility that exists toward him inside the community. Hogan made wrestling a worldwide sensation by dominating the 1980s and the early 1990s during the Hulkamania era. It is impossible to overstate his importance in WWE's national expansion, his larger-than-life persona, and his capacity for audience connection. He served as the foundation for Vince McMahon's wrestling business, the superhero who taught kids to consume their vitamins, pray, and train hard. However, a far more concerning picture becomes apparent as we examine Hogan's legacy in further detail. This is more than just the tale of a wrestler who erred or clashed with his colleagues over personality. Jesse the Body Ventura, one of wrestling's most revered personalities, has delivered the most devastating critique of Hogan's character. The legendary wrestler and former governor of Minnesota has made no secret of his feelings for Hogan. Ventura's response to the question of whether he could make amends with his old friend was prompt and unambiguous.
What? Can't trust him. I'm not friends with anyone I don't trust. I have to have a trust with someone to be their friend. And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize.
What many believe to be Hogan's most heinous betrayal of his fellow wrestlers is revealed by Ventura's statement. Prior to WrestleMania 2, in 1986, Ventura organized WWE artists to call for increased compensation, benefits, and health insurance. Wrestlers were categorized as unprotected independent contractors. Additionally, Ventura's attempt to unionize was their best chance to enhance working conditions. However, Hogan put his own survival ahead of unity, even though he was making more money than the whole locker room at WrestleMania 3, when he told Vince McMahon about the unionization idea. McMahon was able to threaten dismissals and completely stifle the initiative. During a 1991 lawsuit against McMahon over royalties, Ventura learned of Hogan's treachery, verified that Hogan was the source of the information. It is impossible to overestimate the consequences of this treachery. In subsequent interviews, Hogan acknowledged his behavior, saying, "I was making more money than anybody and didn't want equal pay, so I opposed unions." An entire generation of wrestlers were deprived of improved working conditions, health care, and retirement benefits because of this one act of betrayal. He misled every wrestler on his roster as well as every wrestler that entered the industry. After him, as Ventura himself admitted, Hogan's treachery still has repercussions today. Hogan's actions have strengthened our anti-UN stance, which has had a long-term impact on wrestler welfare. As of right now, there is no union. Hogan has come under fire from peers and wrestling fans for rejecting bitter working conditions, therefore sacrificing the well-being of his profession as a whole for his personal financial gain. Long after the unionization incident, this pattern of self-serving behavior persisted. Throughout his career, Hogan gained a reputation for defending his status at the expense of up-and-coming talent by abusing his creative control agreements and influence. Hulkamomania politics, a phrase used in wrestling, came to mean backroom manipulation intended to preserve power regardless of what was best for the organization or the wrestling business overall. Bret the Hitman Hart, one of wrestling's most technically proficient performers and a man whose moral character was never called into question in the ring, is among the most well-known instances of this behavior. Hart and Hogan are at odds because of Hogan's purported use of creative control to secure his position, especially during 1993's WrestleMania 9. Hogan portrays this occurrence as a miscommunication, but the truth was much more premeditated. Hart responded, "I'm not doing business with you," and lied about future plans, accusing Hogan of refusing to lose to him cleanly. Hart has criticized Hogan's ego for stifling up-and-coming talent, calling him a liar and extremely limited in the ring. This episode was a prime example of what wrestling insiders realized was a trend. Regardless of what was best for other performers' careers or what made artistic sense, Hogan would use his power to sway storylines and title choices in order to keep his job. Hart's relationship with WWE was somewhat strained by the feud, which also added to Hart's animosity toward the organization, which was subsequently heightened by the Notorious Screw job in Montreal. Hogan's handling of The Undertaker, one of wrestling's most admired performers and a man whose professionalism and moral values have never been called into doubt, was possibly even more concerning. Hogan alleged The Undertaker of using a tombstone pile driver to injure his neck following their 1991 Survivor Series battle. Being relatively new to WWE at the time, this caused The Undertaker to fear about his career. But later video footage revealed that the move was flawlessly performed, demonstrating that Hogan had lied to save his reputation, although it caused years of friction between the two performers. The Undertaker has since described it as a teaching moment. Hogan's reputation for self-preservation was strengthened by this episode. The Undertaker subsequently pointed out that Hogan had fabricated a neck injury in order to weaken his case. Hogan's relationship with Macho Man Randy Savage, who was once one of his best friends and a tag team partner as the Mega Powers, follows the same trend. Although their on-screen conflict made for interesting entertainment, their real-life problems are rooted in paranoia and jealousy. Hogan portrays this as a miscommunication, but in reality, Savage's jealousy of his ex-wife, Miss Elizabeth, caused him to become suspicious of Hogan's strong bond with her, which resulted in charges of inappropriate activity. Before WrestleMania 9 in 1993, tensions erupted after Savage allegedly slapped Hogan, resulting in a black eye. According to a documentary, Scott Steiner confirmed that Savage acknowledged punching Hogan for disrespecting him. These events demonstrate a man whose ego and self-interest frequently trumped business relationships and the overall welfare of professional wrestling industry. However, Hogan's contribution to the normalization and legitimization of performance-enhancing drug use in professional wrestling, a culture that would ultimately lead to many untimely deaths and health problems among performers, was arguably the most detrimental to his reputation. Hogan admitted to using anabolic steroids for over 14 years, from 1976 to 1990. While testifying under immunity during Vince McMahon's drug distribution trial in 1994. His 1991 appearance on The Arsenio Hall Show, in which he minimized his usage of steroids, was one of the first public denials that this testimony challenged. Hogan estimated that 75 to 80% of wrestlers he knew in the 1980s used steroids, exposing the widespread usage of steroids in the sport. McMahon's acquittal benefited from Hogan's testimony, but it also tarnished his reputation as a healthy role model and exposed the murky side of a business that valued looks over the health of its performers. For many years to come, the wrestling industry would see a great deal of health issues and early fatalities as a result of the steroid use culture that Hogan helped establish. However, the personal scandals that would subsequently surface, exposing an even darker side to the man behind the Hulkamania character and permanently changing how wrestlers and fans alike perceived their once-loved hero, would outweigh these professional betrayals and backstage imaginations? A legacy devastated by scandals. Hogan's public persona was based on moral clarity and wholesomeness. He was the kind person who encouraged kids to consume their vitamins, pray, and train hard. His parents had faith in him. Kids looked up to him. He was promoted by wrestling promoters as the quintessential American hero. However, beneath this meticulously constructed facade was a guy whose family connections were failing, his personal life was devolving into turmoil, and his private chats exposed views and values that were diametrically opposed to his public persona. The racism issue that emerged in 2015 may have been the one that exposed Hogan's moral shortcomings and hurt his reputation the most. A 2007 sex tape was the source of the issue. Even his most ardent supporters were taken aback by the continuous pattern of racial language and attitudes in the leaked audio, which went beyond a single instance of poor judgment. Hogan's explanation explains his emotional state, but it doesn't justify the content of the recording. According to the leaked transcript, Hogan expressed uneasiness over his daughter Brooke's alleged relationship with a black man by using the N-word several times when talking about her dating life. Even more unsettling was another audio clip that came to light in which Hogan worried about being reborn as a black person because of karma following his son Nick's 2007 vehicle accident that almost killed a buddy. The consequences were catastrophic and quick. On July 24, 2015, WWE ended his contract and deleted all of his information from their website, including his Hall of Fame profile. One of their biggest stars was essentially removed from the company's official history when they released a statement, highlighting their dedication to diversity and inclusion. Hogan tried to offer background and justification when questioned about his racist comments, but his credibility was further damaged by his statements. This effort at explanation exposed a basic misunderstanding of responsibility and accountability in addition to historical bigotry. Instead of accepting complete responsibility for his language and beliefs, Hogan tried to place the blame on his upbringing and surroundings, which many onlookers found to be a weak justification. His relationships with black wrestlers and fans were immediately and permanently impacted. After Hogan was reinstated, Kofi Kingston of The New Day chose not to engage with him because he was upset personally, but unconcerned professionally. There was disagreement in the locker room, according to Mark Henry, as some wrestlers viewed Hogan's apologies as more commercial than genuine. Booze continued to appear at events even after being reinstated in 2018, and wrestlers such as Seth Rollins dubbed Hogan's lack of respect is a result of his own ego. Another extremely distressing period of Hogan's life was closely tied to the racism scandal. The issue over the sex tape had been simmering since 2007. Hogan said that the footage, which showed him with Heather Clem, the wife of radio host Bubba, the Love Sponge, was made without his knowledge during a time of poor decision-making and personal upheaval. Although Hogan was right to acknowledge responsibility, the events surrounding the recording exposed trends in his judgment and interpersonal connections. In 2012, Hogan filed a $100 million civil lawsuit against Gawker Media for invasion of privacy after the outlet disclosed the tape. In 2016, the case came to a close when a Florida jury Gawker's insolvency resulted from the $140 million damages award given to Hogan and the $31 million settlement. The matter was made more complicated by the betrayal by someone he regarded as a close friend. This incident exposed Hogan's tendency to surround himself with people who would eventually take advantage of and betray him. In addition to his bad judgment in his personal relationships, his reputation would be forever harmed by the scandal that resulted from the racist comments that were discovered on this sex tape. The breakdown of Hogan's family ties, especially with his daughter Brooke, was possibly the most tragic component of his personal collapse. Their reality show, Hogan Knows Best, had brought the Hogan family into the spotlight by portraying them as a loving, close-knit family. Later, it became clear that the truth was much more intricate and concerning. Since childhood, Brooke Hogan has publicly claimed that she has been subjected to severe verbal and emotional abuse, which has often escalated into physical abuse. She made it clear that the reasons for her choice to cut off communication with both parents were entirely different, and she made it clear that the abuse was not committed by the person you might think, indicating that there were intricacies in the family relationships that went well beyond what the general public believed. Hogan's public humiliation and personal failure were compounded by the breakdown of his marriage to Linda due to allegations of adultery, including an affair with a close friend of their daughter, Brooke. Their 2009 divorce was widely reported. In media appearances, Linda publicly denounced Hogan as a liar and sex addict. The terrible vehicle incident only made the family's problems worse. Accident in 2007 that involved Nick, Hogan's kid. While driving under the influence and racing his Toyota Supra, Nick, then 17 years old, was engaged in a serious vehicle accident that left his passenger, former Marine John Graziano, with significant brain impairments that would require lifetime care. The Hogans were sued by the Graziano family, who settled for about $1, $5 million after medical and legal expenses. Hogan also came under fire for his insensitive remarks made while Nick was incarcerated, in which he implied that Graziano's wounds were a necessary part of God's plan. His public image and connections within the wrestling community were further harmed by these remarks, which exposed a callousness and lack of empathy. These individual scandals combined produced an image of a man whose personal life was very different from his public character. It was discovered that the virtuous family man who advocated for training, prayers, and vitamins was actually someone whose own family had been shattered by abuse, whose interpersonal relationships had been characterized by treachery and bad judgment, and whose private conversations had exposed views that ran counter to everything he professed to stand for. These disclosures were especially upsetting to wrestlers who had viewed Hogan as a leader in the sport and an inspiration. Instead, the man who was meant to embody the finest qualities of professional wrestling turned into a representation of moral failings and deceit. Not only did his acts harm his personal reputation, they gave the wrestling industry as a whole a bad reputation. These individual shortcomings would essentially have far-reaching effects, changing the wrestling community's perspective on accountability, leadership, and the duties associated with serving as the industry's spokesperson. The long-term effects and industry accountability. Although the wrestling business has long relied on fantastical characters and gripping plots, Hogan's career highlighted the perilous nexus between fictitious bravery and actual accountability. The weight of their public identities and the expectations of fans who have emotionally engaged in their characters follow wrestlers when they leave the ring. Hogan's inadequacies went beyond his own failings. They were betrayals of the faith that a whole generation of wrestling fans and business people had in him. As the leading babyface figure in WWE, John Cena has frequently been likened to Hogan. Shows a sharp difference in how to manage the obligations that come with serving as a wrestling company spokesperson. With over 650 wishes granted, Cena has surpassed Hogan's Make-A-Wish record, a feat he attributes to Hogan's influence. Cena, on the other hand, has continuously stood up for his fellow wrestlers and upheld his integrity both inside and outside the ring, whereas Hogan exploited his position for personal benefit at the expense of his teammates. Examining their Contrasting relationships with up-and-coming talent made the disparities in their approaches to industry leadership especially clear. Cena established his reputation by promoting up-and-coming talent and maintaining the wrestling industry's viability, whereas Hogan was infamous for his Hulkamania politics and refusal to promote younger performers. This essential distinction and a larger shift in wrestling culture that prioritizes teamwork over self-preservation is reflected in philosophy. Hogan compared John Cena's heel turn to his NWO formation in early 2025 and offered a constructive assessment. "I anticipated more of the same from John Cena when he turned heel. You didn't feel like you were being hit by a huge wave of titles. Although this may appear to be typical wrestling commentary, it highlights the continuous conflict between Hogan's age and modern wrestlers who have different goals and ideals. The fact that Hogan struggled with substance misuse during his career further demonstrates how the industry has failed to safeguard the health and welfare of performers. His open admission of his difficulties using fentanyl and prescribed medication's physical and mental toll that professional wrestling takes on athletes is exemplified by addiction. The human cost of a wrestling culture that put performance before participant welfare is exposed in this horrific story of addiction and recovery. The way that Brooke Hogan describes her father's procedures is astounding. The tragic irony of Hogan's legacy is further compounded by the fact that his resistance to unionization helped create an industry structure that did not adequately assist and care for wrestlers who were coping with such challenges. Hogan became even more estranged from many in the wrestling industry as a result of the political scandals that surfaced later in his career. His outspoken backing of contentious politicians and his attendance at intensely partisan gatherings exacerbated tensions within a sector that is becoming more inclusive and diverse. Although wrestlers have a right to their political beliefs, Hogan's choice to become so involved in partisan politics was another divergence from the unifying force he was meant to be. Hogan's political engagement was just another source of disappointment and division for a business that attracts fans from a wide range of political viewpoints, especially for wrestlers from different backgrounds. Perhaps the most tragic example of how Hogan's personal shortcomings impacted people closest to him is the complicated relationship he had with his family, especially his distance from his daughter Brooke. Their connection remained strained until his death, despite the affection that was conveyed in their last discussion. Brooke found out about his passing through a text message from her brother Nick to her husband. Brooke paid tribute to her father, in a posthumous way used Hulk's middle name, Jong, to name her daughter Molly Jean Alexi. Although they were not close at the time of his death, this gesture implies that she still loved him very much despite their distance from one another. The realization that love alone was insufficient to repair the harm inflicted by years of dysfunction and bad decisions, rather than anger or apathy, is what makes their relationship tragic. Examining why wrestlers such as John Cena and other business professionals have animosity toward Hogan, it's critical to recognize that their animosity goes beyond simple personal distaste or jealousy. It comes from an understanding that Hogan's behavior seriously damaged the wrestling business and its members. Because of his betrayal of the unionization drive, wrestlers were denied fundamental protections and advantages that would have avoided innumerable injuries and untimely deaths. Other performers lost out on opportunities and money as a result of his backstage politics. Because professional wrestling places more of a premium on performers' safety, diversity, and accountability, his personal scandals hurt the sport's credibility. Overall, the widespread wellness initiatives, anti-bullying guidelines, and support networks that the modern WWE has put in place may have helped to avert some of the problems that beset Hogan's age. Nonetheless, the industry is still impacted by the core issues that Hogan's career brought to light, such as the absence of union representation, the pressure to perform despite injuries, and the ego-driven political culture. Hogan's leadership style is the complete opposite of John Cena's. Where Hogan safeguarded his position and hoarded possibility, Cena has made a career out of promoting up-and-coming artists and utilizing his position to push for constructive change, instead of merely abusing his position for personal benefit. Cena's record-breaking Make-A-Wish participation shows a sincere dedication to the obligations that come with being a wrestling superstar. The disparity between these two methods of becoming a wrestling celebrity explains why many modern wrestlers are so disillusioned with Hogan. It goes beyond what he did incorrectly. It concerns the things he could have done better. Hogan may have had a good impact on the wrestling profession with his platform and influence. Rather, his legacy consists of lost chances and strained bonds. It all comes down to the significance of using one's platform sensibly and the long-term repercussions of putting one's own interests ahead of the common good for wrestling stars, both present and future. Hogan's activities have had a lasting effect on wrestling culture, as seen by the fact that wrestlers like John Cena, who never collaborated with him directly during his time, still have misgivings about him. These sentiments aren't motivated by personal hostility, but rather by an understanding that Hogan's decisions had a significant impact on the industry and still have an impact on performers today. Thank you for viewing. If you enjoyed it, click on one of the recommended videos that is currently displayed on your screen to continue the trip and see more incredible material.